I never thought I'd come to despise the walls of the house I grew up in, but when I stood in my late uncle's study, staring at the polished mahogany desk where his will had been read just a week earlier, I felt nothing but poison churning through me. My name is Wesley Keller, and if you stay with me long enough, you'll see how a single signature forged in greed could strip a man of his dignity, his future, and everything he thought he could trust about family. My uncle, Lawrence, had been more of a father to me than my own had ever been. After my parents' accident, he raised me like his own son. He never married, never had children, so the assumption had always been that the estate he built, land, investments, and that sprawling Victorian home I once called sanctuary, would one day pass to me. It wasn't entitlement. It was what he said to me himself during our long talks on the porch, his cigar smoke curling into the night as he'd pat my shoulder and say, "Wesley, one day this will be yours. I built it for you." Those words carried me through years of studying law, through late nights working double shifts, through the gnawing emptiness of losing parents too young. It was more than money. It was stability, recognition, belonging. That was before Aunt Marjorie sank her claws into the foundation of my life. She wasn't even truly my aunt. She had been married briefly to my mother's brother before their divorce, but she lingered like a shadow around the family, always circling when wealth was involved. I tolerated her presence because Uncle Lawrence, kind to a fault, kept her around the edges of our gatherings. He said she was lonely, and out of respect for him, I bit my tongue, even when she made snide comments about how unfair it was that one nephew inherited affection while the rest of the family got crumbs. I should have seen the storm forming behind her polished smiles. When the will was read, my hands trembled as I held the thick envelope Lawrence's lawyer, Mr. Winslow, had distributed. I expected grief, perhaps a bittersweet comfort in his words. Instead, the room tilted when the lawyer read aloud, "I, Lawrence Keller, hereby leave the majority of my estate, including the residence at Brook Hollow and the sum of $7 million, to my beloved sister-in-law, Marjorie Wilcox." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My ears rang, and the faces of distant cousins blurred as if underwater. I'd been reduced to a footnote, an allotment of a modest trust fund, enough to scrape by for a few years, but nowhere near what Lawrence had promised me. The room buzzed with gasps, whispers, thinly veiled smirks from relatives who had always resented me. And Marjorie, sitting straight-backed with her crimson nails folded neatly in her lap, allowed the faintest smile to curve her lips, as though she'd been waiting her entire life for this performance. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Betrayal has a taste, metallic and cold, and it flooded my mouth as I tried to reconcile the uncle I knew with the words written on that page. That night, I went back to the house, to the study, rifling through drawers I'd never dared open while Lawrence lived. I searched for clues, some explanation. He wasn't senile. He wasn't manipulated easily. Something didn't make sense. That's when I saw it. The date on the will, just 2 weeks before his death. Too convenient. My gut screamed what my brain didn't want to believe. Someone had tampered with his intentions. But who had the access? The answer crawled into my mind with a sick inevitability. Marjorie. The woman who had sniffed around lawyers her entire life, who lived for schemes dressed in pearls. I didn't sleep for days, replaying her smug composure as if she had already won. But anger sharpened my grief into resolve. I began digging into records, meeting with Lawrence's longtime assistant, Clara, who confessed in a trembling voice that Lawrence had spoken of revising his will again just days before his death, back in my favor. Yet he never got the chance. "He said he was going to call Mr. Winslow on Monday," she whispered, twisting her handkerchief. "But then he passed on Sunday night. A coincidence? Or something darker?" My suspicion hardened into certainty when I caught wind of whispers from within the law office. Marjorie had been seen meeting privately with a junior partner, David Caro, in the weeks leading up to the will's change. A man young, ambitious, desperate for influence. I knew the type. I had studied among them. And then I got my proof. Not ironclad, but enough to ignite a fire. A copy of Lawrence's original will surfaced in an old safe deposit box, one that listed me as the primary heir. Same signature, same phrasing, except without Marjorie's name plastered across the fortune. My hands shook as I held the document under the dim light of my apartment. I wasn't crazy. He hadn't betrayed me. She had. The problem was that proof alone wouldn't hold up unless I could show the alteration was fraudulent. I needed someone to crack, someone to confess. That someone was Caro. And if there was one thing I knew about men like him, it was that their ambition outweighed their loyalty. I started showing up at his favorite bar, lingering in corners until he noticed. Casual conversations led to pointed questions, and though he tried to play it cool, his eyes darted whenever Marjorie's name came up. I could feel the wall trembling. It was only a matter of pressure. But I had to tread carefully. If Marjorie even suspected I was onto her, she'd bury everything. Nights grew longer, sleep abandoned me, and each morning I stared at my reflection, seeing not the man who once trusted in family, but someone forged by betrayal into steel. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about inheritance, it was about legacy. Lawrence had believed in me, had wanted me to carry forward what he built. Marjorie had stolen not only money, but the validation of a bond I had clung to all my life. I couldn't let her rewrite his story or mine. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Clara, the assistant, called me late one evening. Her voice quivered. "Wesley, I can't keep quiet anymore. I saw Marjorie hand an envelope to Mr. Caro the day before the will was signed. It wasn't Lawrence's handwriting on the draft I saw. It was typed. She bribed him, Wesley. She bought your uncle's future out from under you." My chest pounded. At last I had a witness. But witnesses could be silenced, intimidated, discredited. I knew Marjorie. She'd smear Clara's name, claim senility, manipulate sympathy. I needed something undeniable, and I knew exactly where to get it. By then, word of a legal dispute had spread through the family, whispers turning into open jeers. Relatives took sides, most too eager to believe I was just a bitter nephew crying over lost millions. But I didn't care. I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting to drag the truth into the light. And so I prepared myself for battle, knowing the courtroom would become the stage where all masks would fall. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, the kind of scent that lingered in places where too many lives had been dissected and judged. I sat at the plaintiff's table, palms flat against the cold varnished surface, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. Across from me sat Marjorie, draped in a navy suit that probably cost more than my yearly rent, her hair coiled into a perfect chignon, her lips painted with that same smug red that had haunted me since the will reading. She looked at me as if she were already victorious, as if this was nothing more than a formality on her way to cementing her fortune. My lawyer, Margaret Lynn, leaned close. "Stay calm. Facts and pressure. Caro will break if we apply enough." Her voice was a steady anchor, but my insides were a storm. The judge entered, his gavel striking once, and the room snapped into order. What followed felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a duel with words sharpened into blades. Margaret began by presenting the original will we'd uncovered, carefully dated, signed, and notarized. My uncle's clear intention was for me to inherit the estate. Then she held up the altered will, the one naming Marjorie, and let the contrast hang in the air. The room hummed with whispers. Marjorie's lawyer, a slick man named Dalton Reeves, stood to counter,
his voice oozing with mock sympathy. "Your Honor, Mr. Keller is simply a grieving nephew clinging to fantasies. The updated will reflects Mr. Lawrence Keller's true wishes. To suggest otherwise is to dishonor his memory." His words burned, but I clenched my fists and waited. The strategy was not to win in opening arguments, but to unravel the lie thread by thread until it collapsed. When Clara took the stand, my chest tightened. She was nervous, her hands trembling, but her voice carried. She testified about Lawrence's intent to revise the will in my favor, about Marjorie's presence at the office, about the envelope she'd seen exchanged. Reeves tried to discredit her, suggesting her memory was faulty, that grief clouded her recollection. But Clara held her ground, eyes fierce with the kind of courage born from a man she respected. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. David Caro was called. He walked to the stand with false confidence, smoothing his tie, trying to project the image of an untouchable professional. But I saw the sweat at his temples, the way his jaw tightened when Margaret began her questioning. "Mr. Caro, did you oversee the revision of Lawrence Keller's will?" "Yes, at his request," he replied quickly.
"And did you witness him sign it?" A pause, so slight the average listener might miss it. "Yes." Margaret leaned forward. "Are you certain? Because we have handwriting experts prepared to testify that Lawrence's signature on this version does not match his established signatures." The courtroom buzzed. Caro's composure cracked just a hair, his eyes flicking to Marjorie. She didn't move, but I could feel the silent pressure radiating from her across the room. Margaret pressed on, her tone sharpening. "Isn't it true, Mr. Caro, that you met with Marjorie Wilcox privately in the days before this will was signed, that she compensated you for your cooperation?" Reeves objected, but the judge overruled. The question hung heavy in the air. Caro swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "No," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret slid a photograph onto the evidence projector. Grainy, but clear enough, Caro at a cafe, an envelope sliding across the table from Marjorie's manicured hand. The room erupted in whispers. Caro's face drained of color. Reeves leapt up, objecting furiously, but the judge allowed the image to remain. Margaret's voice was calm, surgical. "So, Mr. Caro, would you like to revise your statement?" He faltered. He looked at Marjorie again, but this time she didn't meet his gaze. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Abandoned. That's when it happened. The silence stretched too long, and finally, Caro broke. "She paid me," he blurted, his words tumbling out in a rush. Gasps filled the courtroom. "She wanted the will rewritten. She said Lawrence would never notice, that he was too sick to fight it. I drafted it, and I let her dictate the terms." My chest burned as if all the air had been sucked from the room. There it was, the truth I'd clawed toward through sleepless nights and endless doubt. Margaret didn't gloat. She simply nodded, letting the confession hang like a death knell. Reeves sputtered objections, claiming coercion, but the damage was done. Under oath, Caro had admitted to fraud, and Marjorie's scheme unraveled before her eyes. I looked at her then, truly looked, expecting fury or denial. But what I saw was worse. Emptiness. She sat there like a statue, lips pressed thin, her empire crumbling in silence. The judge's gavel thundered, calling for order. Proceedings dragged on, legal formalities weaving their slow path, but the verdict was inevitable. The altered will was declared void. The original stood. The estate was restored to me. When it was over, I stepped outside into the crisp air, my body trembling with exhaustion and something close to relief. Reporters shouted questions, flashes went off, but all I could think of was Lawrence. I wished he'd lived to see the loyalty that outshone greed, to know his trust in me had not been misplaced. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like a soldier walking away from a battlefield strewn with bodies. Marjorie's face would haunt me, not because she nearly stole everything, but because she reminded me of how fragile trust can be. Even family can wield betrayal like a knife. But as I stood there, the sun breaking through the clouds, I knew one thing with clarity. I had not just inherited a fortune. I had inherited a responsibility. To honor Lawrence's name, to build something greater than what she tried to steal, to make sure his legacy lived through me and not through the poison of her greed. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the money in the world. This story may be over, but the betrayals never stop. Like this video, share it with your circle, and subscribe to Chronicles of Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next. Another shocking story is just one click away below.